June 1985. Mario Castillo, a 32-year-old barber from Medellin, received an offer that would change his life forever. One of Pablo Escobar's associates walked into Mario's small barbershop in Envigado and said that Pablo needed a personal barber, someone who would come to his houses, cut his hair and his family's hair, and be available whenever Pablo needed. The pay would be 10 times what Mario was making at his shop. All he had to do was show up, do his job, and keep his mouth shut about anything he saw or heard. Mario, who had a wife and 2 young children to support, said yes. For the next 8 years, from 1985 to 1993, Mario cut Pablo Escobar's hair every week. And during those 8 years, while Pablo sat in the barber chair with his eyes closed and his guard down, Mario heard terrible things, secrets that no one was supposed to know, confessions that could get people killed, plans that would result in bombings and murders and massacres. And in December 1993, 2 weeks after Pablo was killed by Colombian police, Mario Castillo did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He took a thin metal rod, inserted it into his ears, and deliberately ruptured both of his eardrums, made himself deaf, destroyed his own hearing so he would never have to hear anything again. And for 27 years, he refused to explain why, until 2020, when a journalist finally convinced him to tell his story. Mario Castillo had been a barber since he was 18 years old, had learned the trade from his father, who'd run a small barber shop in Envigado for 30 years. Mario was good at his job, had steady hands, an eye for detail, and a talent for making people feel comfortable in the chair. His clients talked to him, told him about their lives, their problems, their secrets. That's what barbers did. They listened. They were like therapists with scissors. Mario had heard thousands of stories over the years. Affairs, financial troubles, family drama. He'd learned to listen without judging, to nod sympathetically, and to forget everything the moment the client left the chair. That discretion, that ability to keep secrets, was what made him a good barber, and it was what caught Pablo Escobar's attention. When Pablo's people approached Mario in 1985, they told him that Pablo valued privacy, that Pablo needed someone who could cut his hair without asking questions, without gossiping, without repeating anything they heard. Mario assured them he understood. He'd been keeping clients' secrets for 14 years. He knew how to be discreet. They hired him on the spot. The first time Mario cut Pablo's hair was in June 1985 at one of Pablo's estates outside Medellin. Pablo sat in a portable barber chair that had been set up in his bedroom, told Mario exactly how he wanted his hair cut, short on the sides, slightly longer on top, neat and professional. Mario worked carefully, precisely, making sure every cut was perfect. Pablo sat with his eyes closed, relaxed, occasionally making phone calls or talking to associates who came in and out of the room. Mario tried not to listen to the conversation, tried to focus on his work, but it was impossible not to hear. That first day, Mario heard Pablo order someone to kill a judge, heard him discuss the details, when, where, how to make it look like a robbery, heard him talk about it the way most people talk about grocery shopping. Casual, matter of fact, like murder was just another item on his to-do list. Mario's hands shook as he finished the haircut, but Pablo didn't notice. Just looked in the mirror, nodded approvingly, and paid Mario in cash. More money than Mario usually made in a month. Same time next week, Pablo said, "And Mario, you didn't hear anything today. Understand?" Mario understood. He just heard Pablo Escobar order a murder, and if he ever told anyone, he'd be next. For the next 8 years, Mario came to Pablo's houses every week, sometimes twice a week if Pablo had an important meeting or event. He cut Pablo's hair, trimmed his mustache, cut his son Juan Pablo's hair, occasionally cut the hair of Pablo's bodyguards and associates. And every single time, while Mario worked, Pablo talked, made phone calls, gave orders, discussed plans, confessed things, and Mario heard all of it. He heard Pablo order bombings, heard him plan assassinations, heard him discuss bribing politicians and judges, heard him talk about cocaine shipments, about money laundering, about which police officers were on his payroll and which ones needed to be killed, heard him confess to murders, to kidnappings, to acts of violence that would shock the world if they ever became public, heard him talk about his enemies, the Cali cartel, the Colombian government, the DEA, and what he planned to do to them. And Mario couldn't unhear any of it, couldn't forget, couldn't stop the words from echoing in his head long after he'd left Pablo's house. He tried to focus on other things, tried to think about his family, his shop, his normal life. But the secrets followed him, haunted him, made him wake up at night in a cold sweat, remembering things Pablo had said, things Pablo had ordered, things Pablo had confessed. The worst part was that Pablo trusted him, treated him almost like a friend, would ask Mario about his family, about his barbershop, about his life, would give him generous tips, would sometimes give him extra money if Mario mentioned that his kids needed something. Pablo was kind to Mario, generous, protective, and that made it worse. Because Mario knew that Pablo's kindness was conditional, that if Mario ever betrayed that trust, if he ever repeated anything he'd heard, Pablo would kill him without hesitation. Would kill his wife and children too, just to make sure the secret died with. So Mario kept quiet, kept cutting Pablo's hair, kept listening to things he didn't want to hear, kept carrying secrets that felt like they were crushing him from the inside. And he started to hate his job, started to hate the sound of Pablo's voice, started to hate himself for being complicit, for being part of Pablo's world, for knowing things that could save lives if he reported them, but would end his own life. In 1989, after 4 years of cutting Pablo's hair, Mario developed a nervous condition. His hands would shake uncontrollably sometimes. He'd have panic attacks, would wake up screaming from nightmares about the things he'd heard. His wife begged him to quit, told him the money wasn't worth it, told him he was destroying himself. But Mario couldn't quit. Knew that quitting would make Pablo suspicious, would make Pablo wonder if Mario was planning to talk, would make Pablo decide that Mario was a liability. So Mario kept working, kept cutting hair, kept listening, kept dying inside. The breaking point came in November 1993. Pablo was on the run. The Colombian government had intensified their hunt. Los Peeps was killing Pablo's associates. Pablo was moving from safe house to safe house, paranoid, desperate, running out of options. But he still wanted his hair cut, still called Mario to come to wherever he was hiding. And during what would be their last session together, 2 weeks before Pablo was killed, Pablo said something that Mario would never forget. Pablo was sitting in the barber chair, eyes closed, while Mario trimmed his hair. And Pablo started talking, not to anyone in particular, just talking, confessing, like he knew the end was coming and he needed to get things off his chest. You know what the worst thing I ever did was, Mario? Pablo asked. Mario didn't answer, didn't want to engage, just kept cutting. The Avianca bombing, Flight 203, 1989. I put a bomb on that plane to kill one man, one presidential candidate who was going to be on that flight. But he changed his plans at the last minute, didn't get on the plane, and the bomb still went off. Killed 110 people, innocent people, women, children, people who had nothing to do with me or my war. I killed 110 people to kill one man who wasn't even on the plane. Mario's hands froze. He'd heard about the Avianca bombing. Everyone in Colombia had. It had been one of the worst terrorist attacks in the country's history. But hearing Pablo confess to it, hearing the details, hearing the casual way he talked about killing 110 innocent people, made Mario feel sick. I don't feel guilty about most of the people I've killed, Pablo continued. They were enemies. They were in the game. They knew the risks. But those people on that plane, they were just trying to get somewhere, just living their lives. And I killed them because I was too impatient to wait for another opportunity to kill my real target. That's the worst thing I've done. Not because I killed 110 people, but because I killed them for nothing. Because it didn't even work. Pablo opened his eyes, looked at Mario in the mirror. You're a good listener, Mario. You know that. 8 years you've been cutting my hair. 8 years you've heard me talk about things that would get most people killed. And you've never repeated a word. Never betrayed me. That's loyalty. That's rare. I appreciate that. Mario finished the haircut in silence, took his payment, left, and knew that he couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't keep carrying these secrets. Couldn't keep being the person who knew where all the bodies were buried. Couldn't keep being Pablo Escobar's confessor. 2 weeks later, on December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar was killed by Colombian police on a rooftop in Medellin. Mario heard the news on the radio, felt a wave of relief. It was over. Pablo was dead. Mario was free. He didn't have to cut Pablo's hair anymore. Didn't have to listen to confessions and orders and plans. Didn't have to carry the secrets anymore. But the secrets didn't go away. They were still in his head, still echoing, still haunting him. And Mario realized that even though Pablo was dead, the things Mario knew were still dangerous. The Colombian government would want to know what Pablo had told him. The DEA would want to interview him. Pablo's enemies would want to know what secrets Mario was carrying. And Pablo's remaining associates would want to make sure Mario never talked. Mario was a liability, a walking database of Pablo Escobar's secrets. And as long as he could hear, as long as he could speak, as long as he could testify, he was in danger. So Mario made a decision that everyone who knew him thought was insane. A decision that would protect him in a way that nothing else could. He decided to make himself deaf, to destroy his own hearing so completely that he could never testify about what he'd heard, could never be interrogated. could never be forced to repeat Pablo's confessions. If he couldn't hear, if he was medically, permanently deaf, then the secrets would die with him, would be locked away forever in a mind that could no longer process sound. On December 14, 1993, 12 days after Pablo's death, Mario went into his bathroom, took a thin metal rod, a straightened coat hanger, and inserted it into his right ear, pushed it deep, felt the sharp, terrible pain as it punctured his eardrum, felt the blood running down the side of his face, felt his hearing in that ear disappear into a high-pitched ringing and then silence. And then he did the same thing to his left ear, ruptured the eardrum, destroyed his hearing, made himself deaf. His wife found him on the bathroom floor, bleeding from both ears, and screamed, rushed him to the hospital. The doctors were horrified, asked him what happened. Mario wrote on a piece of paper, "Accident, fell, hit my head." The doctors didn't believe him. The injuries were too precise, too deliberate, but they couldn't prove anything. They treated the ruptured eardrums, told Mario that his hearing was permanently damaged, that he would be deaf for the rest of his life, and sent him home. Mario's wife demanded to know why. Why would he do this to himself? Why would he destroy his own hearing? Mario wrote her a note. "I heard things I can't unhear. This is the only way to make sure I never have to hear them again. The only way to make sure I'm safe." She didn't understand. Thought he'd had a mental breakdown. Thought the stress of working for Pablo had driven him insane. She left him 6 months later. Took the children. Mario didn't fight it. Knew he couldn't explain. Knew she'd never understand that he'd sacrificed his hearing to save his life. For the next 27 years, Mario lived as a deaf man. Learned sign language. Got a job doing manual labor, construction, warehouse work, jobs that didn't require hearing. Lived alone. Kept himself. Never talked about Pablo. Never talked about the 8 years he'd spent cutting Pablo's hair. Never explained why he'd made himself deaf. People who knew him thought he was crazy. Thought he'd destroyed his life for no reason. But Mario knew the truth. Knew that his deafness had saved him. Because in the years after Pablo's death, many of Pablo's associates were killed or arrested. Many of the people who'd worked for Pablo, who'd known his secrets, who could have testified against his remaining allies, disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. But nobody came for Mario. Nobody interrogated him. Nobody tried to force him to talk. Because what was the point? He was deaf. Couldn't hear questions. Couldn't participate in an interrogation. Couldn't testify in court. He was useless as a witness. And that uselessness kept him alive. In 2020, 27 years after Mario had made himself deaf, a Colombian journalist named Felipe Restrepo was researching a book about Pablo Escobar's inner circle. He'd heard rumors about a barber who'd worked for Pablo for 8 years. Who'd heard things. Who'd made himself deaf after Pablo's death. Felipe tracked Mario down. Found him living in a small apartment in Medellin, working part-time at a warehouse, living a quiet, isolated life. Felipe approached Mario with a notepad and pen. Wrote, "I want to tell your story. I want to know why you made yourself deaf. Will you talk to me?" Mario stared at the note for a long time. 27 years of silence. 27 years of keeping the secret. 27 years of living with the decision he'd made. And now someone was asking him to explain, to break the silence, to finally tell the truth. Mario wrote back, "Why should I?" Felipe wrote, "Because people should know what Pablo Escobar did to the people around him, how he destroyed lives, how he made people like you choose between their safety and their sanity. Your story matters." Mario thought about it. Thought about the 8 years he'd spent listening to Pablo's confessions. Thought about the secrets he'd carried. Thought about the decision he'd made to destroy his own hearing. Thought about whether it was finally safe to talk. Pablo had been dead for 27 years. Most of his associates were dead or in prison. The Medellin cartel was history. Maybe it was finally safe. Maybe Mario could finally explain. He agreed to tell his story. Over the course of several months, through written notes and sign language interpreters, Mario told Felipe everything. About the 8 years cutting Pablo's hair. About the things he'd heard. About the Avianca confession. About the decision to make himself deaf. About the 27 years of silence that followed. Felipe published the story in 2021. Pablo Escobar's Barber. The man who heard too much and made himself deaf. The story went viral. People around the world read about Mario's sacrifice. About the impossible choice he'd made. About the 8 years of secrets that had driven him to destroy his own hearing. The reaction was mixed. Some people praised Mario for his sacrifice. Said he'd done what he had to do to survive. Said he was a victim of Pablo's cruelty, forced to make an impossible choice. Others criticized him. Said he should have gone to the police. Said he should have testified. Said that by staying silent, by making himself deaf, He'd allowed Pablo's secrets to die with him, allowed Pablo's crimes to go unpunished. Mario's response, written in a note to Felipe, was simple. I did what I had to do to stay alive. I don't regret it. I'm still here. That's what matters. In an interview included in Felipe's article, a psychologist who specialized in trauma explained Mario's decision. What Mario did was an extreme form of self-protection. He'd been forced to carry secrets that put his life in danger. He couldn't forget what he'd heard. He couldn't stop being a threat to powerful people, so he eliminated his ability to be a threat. He made himself deaf, so he couldn't hear any more secrets. So he couldn't testify, so he became worthless as a witness. It's a tragic form of survival. He sacrificed a fundamental part of himself, his hearing, to protect himself from the consequences of what he'd heard. The article also included testimony from other people who'd worked for Pablo. A cook who developed selective mutism after Pablo's death stopped speaking entirely because she was afraid of accidentally revealing something she'd heard. A driver who'd moved to another country and changed his name. A bodyguard who turned himself into police and requested protective custody because he was more afraid of Pablo's remaining associates than he was of prison. All of them had made sacrifices to protect themselves from the secrets they carried, but none as extreme as Mario's. Mario Castillo is still alive as of 2024. He's 71 years old, still deaf, still living in Medellin. He declined to do any follow-up interviews after Felipe's article was published. Wrote a note saying, "I've told my story. That's enough. I just want to live the rest of my life in peace." But his story remains one of the most haunting to emerge from the Pablo Escobar era, not because of the violence, though the things Mario heard were certainly violent, but because of what it reveals about the cost of proximity to Pablo Escobar, about how being close to Pablo, even in a seemingly innocent role like a barber, could destroy your life, about how the secrets you heard, the things you witnessed, could become a burden so heavy that you'd rather destroy your own hearing than carry them. Mario's story asks a question that has no easy answer. What would you do if you'd heard what Mario heard? If you'd carried those secrets for 8 years? If you knew that speaking could get you killed, but staying silent meant living with the weight of terrible knowledge? What would you choose? Would you go to the police and risk death? Would you stay silent and live with the guilt? Or would you, like Mario, find a way to make yourself unable to speak? To make yourself useless as a witness? To sacrifice a part of yourself to survive? There's no right answer. Only the answer Mario chose. And the fact that he's still alive, 31 years after Pablo's death, suggests that maybe, in his impossible situation, he made the only choice that would have kept him breathing. He heard too much, so he made sure he'd never hear anything again. And in doing so, he saved his own life.